Welcome and thank you everyone for joining us for Fantastic Flows and where to find them at Automation Dreaming 2022. My name is Cassie Supoliwski and I'm currently the Senior Director of Data Solutions at a nonprofit called One Goal. So a little bit about me. I also do some independent contracting with a company called Fortify. I'm a Salesforce MVP as of 2021. This is my second year. I co-lead the Chicago nonprofit user group. I've been blazing trails in Salesforce since 2014, which is when I started at One Goal. I've got 10 Salesforce certifications, working on numbers 11 and 12. And I do the speaking thing a lot. So I've been, I think, at more than 15 in-person events. And I also manage a side passion project. That's an awesome admin job board for entry-level roles. So there's the bit.ly link there. If you go to any of my social media links, you can find it on there as well. But we have just a bit about time today, so I want to make sure we can get to all the good stuff. So link to the slides, the QR code will take you there, bit.ly/fantasticflows, automation dreamin', case sensitive. I'll show this again at the end, and I think you may have slides, access to slides through the site as well. So what I'm going to go through during this session, really want to help you kind of find your flow. So if you are still trying to get into flow, figuring out how to get started, transitioning from using the other automation tools we've had, this is kind of the session for you. I'm also hoping to give you a little bit of flotivation or give you some flowmentum to get started in your journey. So some ideas about the different ways that you can use flows that are really simple but can help solve complex issues, or even be just really good tools for you on an admin side of things and cleaning data and things like that. So again, where you can use flows in Salesforce, and lots of resources and learning and next steps. So we're not going to dive deep into any single flow. This isn't going to be the most complex examples of flows you've ever seen, but hoping to give you some ideas and again, some of the motivation to get started and to start your journey with flows or continue on. You may see this little robot. That's our little automation robot on some slides. Anytime you see that robot, there will be a link to more resources. So again, if you access the slides, you will be able to click on those links in addition to the resources that I have at the end. So a little bit of history and how we got here. So this every time I do this presentation changes because flow is constantly changing, which is a good thing. So starting in spring 19, we have the new flow builder. So if you never worked in the old flow, I don't remember what it was called. If you never worked in it, great for you. It was a little intimidating. It felt very developer-like. It felt very intimidating to have to understand all of the different pieces. But in spring 2019, with that release, we got the new flow builder, which is beautiful. It's a lot more intuitive. It's just easier on the eyes, to be honest, and it has a lot more functionality that, as you can see, they have built out over the years. So coming in winter 20, then we had Salesforce automatically stores record variables. Now this was huge. This was the thing that honestly held me back from using Flow for a long time. I remember when I was still trying to understand Flow, I actually went to a session that Jen Lee did at Dreamforce, and she said, flows don't know anything. And that was my first aha moment, because in the old builder and the old flow, that was true. You had to tell flow every single thing you wanted. You wanted to store a variable, you wanted to use a variable, you wanted to reference a variable. You had to create all of those resources. And with Winter 20, that was no longer true. You had the option to automatically store the record variables, so that flow did know some stuff already. Salesforce was going to give it some input so it could kind of store some things that you can reference it. And those of you who've used both systems know what I'm talking about. If you've never used the old one, don't worry about it. Just know the flow is better now. With Summer 20, we had record triggered flow. So this is where we really started getting parity with Process Builder, which is where a lot of folks were really doing a lot of their automation because you could trigger something based on what was happening on a record. Prior to that, flows either had to be launched from another flow, from a process builder, from Apex. Don't hold me to that. I don't remember if that's true. Or they were screen flows, and screen flows are great, but being able to trigger a flow off of something that happens at a record was another game changer. Winter 22 was when they announced the retirement to process builder workflow. That does not mean that they became retired immediately. That's when they said, okay, these are eventually going to be retired and you won't have access to them. So move to flow. That's where we're putting all of our effort. And then in winter 23, we had updated related records for record triggered flow. So again, just being able to traverse more of your Salesforce records. So getting started, really want to just highlight this to say that wherever you are, you have skills coming in that are going to help you use flow, build a flow, use flow, build out additional flows, build on flows, whatever it is. If you've done any sort of process mapping, this is something you should be doing anyways. If you don't have a process, you don't have a flow, or you should not be building a flow if you don't know the process. So sketching and visual, or even writing out in plain text versions first, is just taking that and then you're just translating it to flow. If you understand your object relationships, that is going to really help you with understanding how you can use flow to navigate the records in your system. If you have written formulas and validation rules, those are skills that are going to help you with writing flows. There's things that are going to, you can use formulas inside of flows, but again, that the skills that you're using for those kinds of things are things that you're going to come up in flow as well. Same thing with web forms. If you use form assembly, form stack, there's a lot of things there. If you're building out connectors from your forms to Salesforce, that's a lot of the same kind of thing that you're doing in a flow. The only difference is where you're doing it. So we have a ton of forms that we built out because we didn't know how to build flow. It was the old flow. Then now we're actually saying, oh, we can actually make this happen inside of Salesforce now. If you've done importing and upsorting of data, again, having to understand those relationships and how to traverse your records, those are things that are going to be applicable to getting started with flow and any integration tool you've ever used. So a little bit of kind of what all of the jargon means. So it used to be called Lightning Flow. It is now Salesforce Flow. So that is the product that encompasses building, managing, and running flows and processes, because we do still have Process Builder. It is still there. It is still bundled under this product of Salesforce Flow. Flow Builder is the point and click tool where you actually go to build your flow, and then the flow is what actually runs. So it's the thing that does the thing. It's your screen flow, it's your record triggered flow. And so, we use some of these things interchangeably, but always wanted to take a minute to say, what do they actually mean? So in short, Salesforce Flow is the product that includes multiple tools. One of them is Flow Builder, which helps you create flows to automate your business processes. So let's take a look at kind of our journey here for the next, 15 minutes or so. I'm going to talk through a login flow, before save update flow, screen flow, to update the current record, modifying flows, and flows to create and update related records. I share this because this is sort of the journey I took, and I think it is a good way to kind of step through and step into more and more complex flows from sort of a low risk scenario, easy access, to things that can help build on your skill set and get you more comfortable with all of the things that flow can do. So let's start with a login flow. So login flows are going to direct users through a login process before they even access your Salesforce org or your community. You can read way more about login flows. There's all sorts of documentation on it. One thing to note is that there is just one active login flow per profile. So I always like to start with the first one. So just add a login message. You can do a whole bunch of other stuff with login flows, but the first time I think one of the first flows I actually built was a login message. So we were updating the system, but we didn't want to lock people out, but we wanted to let them know, hey, things might look off. If they do, this is why. So don't start sending in a bunch of tickets. Wait until the end of the day and see if it's resolved itself. So this is the flow. And actually, this is even more complex than it needs to be. You could just have start and a screen. We eventually built this out so that we had different screens for our staff and for our teachers. That's that decision element there. But again, you could have the same screen for everyone. And all that decision point there is looking at our customer's role. And so that's how we're determining what they want to see. Because maybe we want to use some slightly more user-friendly language for folks who maybe aren't in the system all the time versus our staff who are maybe in there more often. And again, there's even more functionality than I think what's here. So you can use display text, you can use a display image. And actually, I think even within, so I have the decision in my flow. I think now with some of the functionality that's in screen flows, you could actually have that as two separate texts that's conditionally visible within the screen. And you could do that on the screen instead of in the flow. I don't know if one way is better than the other. Lots of ways to do the same thing, but something to think about. The thing to know with login flows is you do actually have to take that flow that I just showed you and actually connect it to a separate place in setup called login flows. And this is what it looks like. So you're going to name it. It's our maintenance notification for us. And then you're going to tell it what flow it's going to run, which license it's going to run for, and which profile it's going to run for. So if you want the same login flow to run for all 20 profiles you have, you are going to need to do this 20 times. But it's still easy. It is easier to manage that way. But that means if you don't want everyone to see it, that you can control it by profile. So there's demo in the appendix if you want to see it, but for the sake of time, we are going to move on to before save update flows. So these are faster than any other available record triggered updates. And so there's a beautiful image here that shows you, this is really just a comparison of the time it takes to use something like Process Builder versus a before save flow when you're trying to update the same record that started your action. So again, they're faster. You can help avoid different limits, but they can't access field values that are set only after the record is saved. You can't create or update related records with these, and you can't perform actions other than updating the record that launches the flow. So again, but if you're trying to if something happens on a record and you want to update that same record, this is what you're going to use. It's before save, also known as fast field update. So when you go to create your flow, this is what you're going to see, and it's going to outline those differences for you as well. This is one example we have. This is it. This is the whole flow. I promise you. It's I'm not kidding. This is it. And the really unique use case here is that if you've ever tried to use duplicate matching on a junction object, so for us, it's a college application, which is a college or account, and a contact. Matching and duplicate rules don't play real nice with that because they actually don't check the record ID. They check the text. You can't have more than one lookup, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're doing is when we're creating a college application, before it's saved, we're using that fast field update, we're saying create a compound key, and all that's doing, you can see here, it's going to tell you what it can and can't do. All we're doing is concatenating the ID of the student and of the account. And then we're going to, because it's a before save, so this is where your order of execution is really important to know. Because it's a before save, it's going to save it. It's going to be on the record before the duplicate rules run. So now we can use this in our duplicate rules, and it is a true duplicate check or matching rule for a junction object. So huge shout out to MVP Gaurav Seth, who actually documented this case on his blog and helped me kind of think through, and we kind of went back and forth on this and some of the new features. So again, a use case that I wouldn't have known of. It's super simple, but it was a game changer for us with being able to actually check duplicates on our junction objects. So screen flow to update a current record, I think, is the next step in this learning journey. So we have, again, we're nonprofit. When students leave the program, we have about 6 fields that need to be updated. We can't require them on the page layout because they're not always required. They're only required if a student leaves the program. And they aren't required for every scenario. And there's all sorts of things. So the amount of dirty data we would get on this, and we'd have to follow up with people and say, hey, it looks like this student left the program, but this field isn't filled out. Can you help out? All these things. So we said, hey, let's use a screen flow. And so now we have this screen flow that takes those same fields that are on the page layout, but now that it's in a screen flow, we can require them and say, you have to fill these out. You cannot, do not pass go, do not proceed if you do not fill out these fields. And we can default them. So if we wanted to put in a default date for left one goal, if you want to default the left during semester, if we want to copy anything over that's already on the record, they don't need to worry about changing the status because by virtue of clicking the button, we know that they want to mark them as left the program. So we don't need to say, oh, make sure you change it to this status or that status. And so that's what our screen flow looks like. This is the back end. So we're getting the current fields because it's a button on the record, and I'll show you that. We've got the screen where they're giving us that information. We're assigning it, we're updating the record, and we're done. Of course, because we're good admins, we also have a fault just in case anything happens. There's a lot more documentation about how you can actually send yourself emails and things to get notified about issues and errors in flow. But this is how we're handling it for now. So again, we're passing in var contact ID, and actually I think now you can just use record ID. I don't even think you need to create this separate variable. This is a little bit from the before times. And this is where I mentioned the flow can now store record data. So you can say store everything, choose just the fields you want and let Salesforce do the rest. Or if you're old school, you can still choose the fields and assign the variables. That's kind of like the before the new flow builder. Automatically store all fields, I tend to shy away from because it just seems like you're making it store a lot of data. I don't know if there's actually a best practice on like at what point you would want it to store all things versus not. But if you definitely know exactly what fields you want and you don't think you're ever going to add any more, they can use the second option. If you're more like, ooh, I might build out this flow to do more things down the road and touch more fields, then using the automatically store all fields might be a better option there for you. Again, people may have different opinions on that or be more informed than me about it, but that's kind of how I go about it. And so here you see that status update button. And behind the scenes, that just says it's an action on the contact object. And we're saying it's going to run a flow. So that flow is the fellow status update. So again, by virtue of them clicking the button, we already know some things are true. We know that they want to update some things. And so we can update that behind the scenes. So reviewing and modifying existing flows, I think between the previous one, the update to current record, and this next one is leaps and bounds in the skill set, and not necessarily meaning it's more complex, but I think you get a lot more learning out of this. And personally, again, for me, the reason I put it in here is because this was such a huge moment for me because I started with something that someone else had built. So they had laid the groundwork, they had created some of the variables, they had the basic skeleton of what needed to be done. I just needed to go in and add things. So I didn't have to figure out the whole start to end process. I was just saying, okay, I now wanted to do this. So I wanted to show you some examples of where we've gone from very simple things to much more complex things. And I think this is such a great way, especially if you're in an org that already has automation or has flows, to jump in and really hone in on those skills. So this is the one I just showed you where we're talking about updating that status with a button. So, we've got just a few elements here. That actually now looks like this because new scenarios came in. And so there were times, I think actually on our finished screen here or with the fault screen, there are places in flows like this one or other ones that we have where our screen actually says like this flow can handle X, Y, and Z. If you're trying to do A, B, or C, create a case. Or if it faults out, then we say like, uh-oh, let's, please create a case. And so that's another point is you don't have to have your flow do everything on the first go. Tackle the scenario that is the most annoying, the most impactful, or maybe the simplest. Start with something and then you can always build it out. You can always iterate on it. So now we have different statuses that students might get depending on different information that is known about them going in. We might want to assign different things or update different variables. This is now also attached to, what happens if the teacher leaves the program or if the entire group of students leaves the program. This is that screen flow. Like I said, this login flow. Like I said, it could have also just been a screen, but this is it. And it now looks a little bit like this and probably even more complex because this is an old screenshot. But we actually added in a place where they could add feedback. So there's a subflow here, bonus. There's some more of those in the appendix. There's a subflow that actually says, oh, are you interested in sharing feedback with us? Great. If so, we'll update the contact record, and we're doing a bunch of other stuff here. And again, we didn't have to do the first go around. It was a nice to have, but then it was something we added in and realized it was useful and we could use the login flow for that. This was an original screen flow we had. We wanted to have a different process or different flow for creating a case. We didn't want to use the standard button because we wanted to be able to add in additional help links and kind of have people here's our frequently asked questions. And so that was that first screen. Then we create a case. Then we say, boom, case submitted. Now, and actually this is our most up-to-date one. I just pulled this from our system. Now it looks like this because there's a lot of other scenarios we decided we wanted to account for. We wanted to be able to submit cases on behalf of folks. And so that's where you say, oh, is this an admin? If it is an admin, then say, okay, can you change who the requester is? If they have a due date that's less than 2 business days, we show them an extra screen. We say, are you sure? Is this really important to be done in 2 business days? We also added in the ability to add files and screenshots and things like that directly from this flow. And then doing all sorts of stuff with assignment rules. So again, it started off very simple. It did the job. It still did way more than, did previously. And now it can do even more. And we probably have 3 tickets in our backlog for additional things that we want to add to this someday. All right, and the last one, a simple flow that creates or updates a related record. So we got a couple of examples here. Automatically create a child record. So for us, if you're familiar, if you're in the US with FAFSA, that's our financial aid for applying to colleges. There are sometimes scenarios when a record is created, a contact record is created, we want this FAFSA, this child record to automatically be created. And so this is running and saying, okay, does it, it's counting to see if current records already exist. If it doesn't, it's going to go ahead and create that right away. And again, this is that after save because we are trying to, we are creating child objects that are related to the parent object it started from. Oops. There we go. So you can see here, again, it's that record is created or updated. And this is, again, the actions and related records. So not the fast field updates, but again, it's a simple thing. It's creating one record with 2 fields that are set on the start. This is another cool example of how you can use flow. So flow component on a lightning page. So you can see here we have create a GPA record. GPA records is a child record to our contact. And so we are, again, want to create that. And in this case, again, with a screen flow, we can actually pre-populate some of that information. So in the back end, it's actually reading information about the student in this case, Adam, saying, okay, what do we know about them based on the information? What date do we think should be here? What semester do we think they're trying to enter? What format are we encouraging them to enter? So right now, we're taking this from a place where someone has to go to a separate tab in Salesforce, create a new record, and fill in a bunch of blank fields. So now they're just really entering 1 if everything else is correct. And you can see this on the back end. Again, we're on our lightning page layout. We're adding a flow component. We're telling it which flow to run, and then we're passing in that record.id, which I mentioned earlier. And that's making that process way simpler for that person to accomplish. Again, this is what's behind the scenes because we have a bunch of record types, but just a reminder, depending on your processes, this could be as simple as this. Right? You could get your record, assign your values, set a screen, create your records. So not everything has to be complex. And again, you don't have to solve for every single piece of the problem the first go around. So thinking about, what's the thing that's going to be what we like to say, what's a 15% solution? What's going to solve part of our problem, and knowing that we can always iterate on this later. So closing out, flow is not as scary as you think, at least anymore. If you still have a little bit of PTSD from the awful flow builder, I don't blame you, but I've gotten past it. Hopefully everyone else has too. Wherever you are, you're ready. Again, there's lots of things that you're probably already doing your day-to-day where you can apply that in flow. And again, I think those kind of step through that path of how to get started with flow and increment the complexity and the different tools that you're using. Again, login flow, you could just create a login flow just for your admins. Say, hey, happy Friday. There's lots of scenarios. So think about what your low risk scenarios are that you can build a flow around and start there. I know sometimes it can feel scary for, automation is big and it's doing things and it's touching the system. Think about there are low risk scenarios. There are simple things that you can do to just get your feet wet in it. And again, you're going to be doing this all in a sandbox before you do it in production anyway. So even if you just build things out in a sandbox and you don't push into production, just test, try it out, see what you can do with it. Again, there's multiple avenues for entry, and there's no shortage of resources or support. We know that flow is where Salesforce is going. We know it's the thing that they're going to continue to build out. We know that other automation is going away. And we know that automation is there to do all the things so that when people have to do stuff, they're doing the stuff that matters. So that when humans are taking over and clicking buttons, that it's the things that humans are doing best. Let's let automation do what it can do. And so again, the Trailblazer community is there with you, as exemplified by the fact that there is an automation dreaming. So don't hesitate to reach out, find your resources. Here's a few of my favorites, different automation pages. There's a couple of classes on here. And again, you can stay in touch with me. I promise if you Google me, you'll find you'll find me. There's only one of me. I just ask that you send a message to say, you saw this or where you're connecting from. Again, there's the link bit.ly/fantasticflows automation Dreamin, the QR code. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, for the time being at least. And thank you again so much for joining Automation Dreaming. I hope y'all learned a ton, and thanks to the support from everyone in the community and for the folks who helped put this on.